Hello and welcome to this episode of the Ugandans in Diaspora from Civic TV. I am Phillip Muliisa. I warmly welcome all of you to this conversation, and indeed I look forward to a very interesting, candid and informative conversation with you all. I'm in Kampala and I can comfortably many of you will be on a good morning. I don't know whether we have people who are in the night or something like that. But I send you the complimentary greeting depending on your location and the time zone on in this particular time. On this episode, we are discussing the diaspora community as we head into the 2026 elections. And we want to look at, first of all, their role in the electoral process. But most importantly, we know that for our country, Uganda, the community in diaspora does not participate in the electoral process. You do not vote. There is no infrastructure to allow you to vote. And very many conversations have been held about that particular subject. And today, I want to hear from you because all of you are actually in the diaspora. Apart from myself, it is only me on the beautiful land of Uganda. And I want to hear from you, first of all, why it is so critical and important for you to vote, but also why it has taken us so long for you to actually be able to be participants in that process and how it can be improved day by day. I am Phillip Muliisa, and before we get into the depth of that conversation, I will invite you to first say hello to us and to the viewers and perhaps tell us a bit of what is eye-catching in your particular locations. And start with Uganda, from Kampala, Uganda. How is your location and what can we know about your particular location as of now? For instance, you can hear me? I guess like you mentioned earlier, he is having a couple of things to first connect up to make sure he joins the conversation fully. Let me bring in Mr. Brian. Brian, Kwesiga, greetings, welcome to the show, and how is your environment?
I'm well, Phillip. Thank you so much for having us on your call. It's raining a little bit here in Washington, D.C., actually, but otherwise we are good. And again, I look forward to a fruitful conversation.
Thank you so much, Brian, and we're happy to have you here. Mr. Bakasara, greetings, you're welcome to the show.
Greetings, and momentarily I'll put on my face on camera, and I'm going to encourage Brian to do the same. I believe, Brian, this is your first time on this show. I'm in DC, like Brian, and it's cloudy, rainy. Just took out a little drive, but I'll be heading back inside to watch Arsenal in a moment. But I'm glad to be with you, and greetings to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bakasara Albert, and we're happy to have you indeed. And Mr. Ntambi, Kharim, greetings, you're welcome to the show. We're happy to have you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm also here in the Washington, D.C. area. It's a little bit cloudy and rainy, like everybody said, but it's beautiful, and I'm glad to be part of this panel.
Lastly, but not least, we hope to be joined later by the Honorable Martin Serpa. I hope he joins us on time. Miriam, greetings, welcome to the show, and how is your location?
Hi panelists, greetings from Ohio. My location is also wet. We have a lot of rain, and we are a farming state, so people we are really grateful for rain, so it's good news for them. But we also have racism because of Trump's statements, so we are fine, but not so fine.
So much, and you mentioned that area should be very safe and okay, because there is someone who said there is a particular category of people that feast on pets, and I don't know. But thank you so much for joining us, colleagues. And the subject we talk about today is one that is so important, one for an individual, for a country, and indeed for the world. And as we head into the 2026 general election, we know that very many countries across the world are having elections this year, other countries next year, and ours comes about 2 years from now. I want to start with you, Brian. I've seen bits of what you do and what you say, including the article you wrote recently in the New Vision about the diaspora community and specifically relating to elections and how should be participating. What is your vision in this whole campaign you're undertaking, and what should we expect to see as you proceed with this conversation and activity?
Thank you so much again for having us. So I think ultimately what we want comprehensively is would want to see the government of Uganda, both cabinet and parliament, take up the draft national diaspora policy, which I think they have had for over 10 years now, for cabinet to be able to approve it, and then for parliament to enact the necessary laws to implement that policy, for that to be able to pass. There are very many aspects of the policy, but I think the most immediate need right now is the diaspora being able to vote. That has already been approved. That has already been the court has already ruled on that they do have a constitutional right. So it's really just a matter of the EC to implement it, to make sure to put in place the process, the enabling infrastructure for that to take place. If from some conversations I've had with some members in that area, they feel maybe the EC may not be sure if they actually do have the enabling law, and that's where parliament can come in. We understand there are going to be electoral formulas that are going to be tabled before the election that are going to address different aspects. I would want the ability of the diaspora to vote to be part of that law, and the other parts of the national diaspora policy can then come a little bit later. But eventually, overall, the goal is for us to have that national draft policy, national diaspora policy, be able to be passed and approved by the relevant government authorities.
Thank you so much, Brian. And that's really interesting. I was reading through a report by the European Union Diaspora Facility, and it did a mapping of about 41 countries from the African continent, and they say among the 41 countries, only 21 have a policy or are in the process of putting together a policy to, like when you talk about a diaspora framework that really harmonizes the engagements and interaction of the home community with the diaspora, but also your activities back home and how you relate to the people and the government in the country. But look, you people are out of the country, and oftentimes people want to say that when you leave a community, then you cease to be so connected and understanding of what that community goes through, or you shouldn't be part of what takes place in that particular community. I want to bring in Albert here. Why is it so important for the diaspora community to be active in the politics of the country? Yes, Albert.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting question. Well, if you are considering us as having, for lack of a better word, abandoned Uganda, and therefore we should not have the privilege, at least that's how we surmise your question, then you're being disingenuous, because we're sending you a ton of money. We're participating in everyday life. Just this morning, I just sent money to my sister in Uganda for health reasons. And I'm sure a whole bunch of us on this forum do that on a regular basis. So when did we actually ever leave you? We never did. So that is a little disingenuous of if that's the view. And it is. I'm being facetious here because I know you're saying it, but it's also the view. You call us in Kumacheyo, you call us, you really, we are Baguira, whatever it is you call us. And there is some contempt in those kind of statements. And maybe that is why we're even here on this show and to talk about our rights and to see if we can participate in the privilege of voting in Uganda. But honestly, I mean, like I said, we never left Uganda because we're still participating on the daily lives of Ugandans, from the economy to supporting kids to businesses. We're still there. Yes, we are outside Uganda, but you should be looking at us as people who are outside Uganda for lack of a better. We are enhancing Uganda. We're putting you, we've planted the Ugandan flag in these places, and you guys should look at us as an asset rather than a liability. I'll stop here for a moment.
Thank you so much, Albert. And very interesting to talk about that, because not very many sectors of the country actually are able to raise $1 billion into this economy of our country. And it becomes a question now why it has taken us so long to really give a lot of focus and attention to a sector like this one that contributes, reading from the figures of last year, about $1.4 billion into the economy. Francis, I want to bring you on here. Look, we know what farming, the coffee sector brings, you know what the tourism brings, you know what this day-to-day subsistence agriculture does in the country, we know what any other sector of the economy contributes, but the diaspora community brings a lot of money in the country, like Albert mentioned. Why, in your view, has government and indeed any other person in charge not paid a lot of attention in terms of making sure you people are considered equal partners in this state and indeed be able to contribute to all the other processes, including the electoral process?
Thank you, moderator, fellow panelists, and all Ugandans who are listening in. That is something interesting, and I will first give the first striking answer is poor leadership and planning at the national level. Because if you don't know what you know, then that's how you mess up with even policies. You look at people who are in the diaspora, as how Bakasara said, you look at us as people who are destitute, people who are nobody, people who can contribute nothing. That means you have failed to, or you don't know exactly what assets you have. For example, you have always heard that they are sending MPs to go and benchmark. Now, for us, who would be the asset of benchmarking what is even done in America here that can be leveraged back home. But you find they waste money to send people that MPs are going to benchmark, and name all other countries where Ugandans are in the diaspora. So that would be an opportunity, but Uganda always loses that opportunity, because once we are in a dictatorship as how we are under Museveni, they don't want to hear any dissenting voice. And once you only focus at having power, which sometimes you only use to subdue people than to serve people, then you end up missing on a bigger picture of what can develop Uganda. Like we have always said, we are all ambassadors of Uganda. We have to project a good image, but also at the same time, as how Bakasara has said, we see what is good for our country, and then we say, okay, we can take this back home. But I have said, once the leadership up is rotten, it cannot give us an opportunity to get the appetite of what opportunity, good opportunities to leverage and take back home. So that is the first biggest problem. And as I have always said, there is nothing for us as people in the diaspora without us. I heard Brian talking of the policies and so on that are being made and so on. If we are not consulted, all that is a huge sounding nothing. And I have always said that is being smartly addressed, going nowhere. We have people who are learned. All of us, we did not come. By the way, most of the Ugandans who came here to the diaspora, they either came as students to study. So we did not come as maids, as how somebody can lump us, that maybe we are maids and so on. We came to study, we know things. The Bakasaras are in economics and so on. So you can't equate Bakasara to any other ordinary person. That is a person who is exposed. We are exposed and so on. I'm not saying that people who are back home are not exposed. They are exposed, but this would bring in a good blend in terms of policy, in terms of debate, and then would be moving the country forward. Take an example of China. If you go and read how they came to develop, number one, they make sure that there is technology transfer. You have heard others saying that they steal their knowledge and so on. So apart from Uganda stealing from their fellow Ugandans back home, the leaders, what have they stolen from other countries? Is it technology? or is buying guns and tear gas and using it on the fellow Ugandans? Is it the mining of gold that should benefit the country, or the mining of gold that should benefit individual families? So we can't build a country if we don't come together and then say, okay, what do we need to do as a society? What do we need to do as a country in terms of planning all the different aspects and the different sectors? Once we reach that, and then we say, okay, what are other voices that we need to listen to? Do the people in the diaspora matter? Like as I've said, and you have also echoed it, last year, 1.4 billion US dollars. That was money that was generated from the diaspora being remitted back home. That itself is a good indicator that if you nurture your population in the diaspora, and I always say we the ambassadors of Uganda in the diaspora, then you will have the opportunity of even tapping into other untapped resources. Like this is the era of IT. Why is it that because people have communicated on social media, maybe Facebook, and instead of advising them what to do, you just ban it from a country? But there are others who are using it for business. There are others who are using it for advertisement. There are others who are using it for marketing Uganda in terms of tourism and so on. And then you just ban it. So this is the short-sightedness of the highest order. But as I have said, it all stems from the leadership and poor planning, which I think we need to address seriously. And how do we address it? By ensuring that a formidable diaspora community exists, but how do you engage them in a respectable way? That way we can move forward. But of course, having leadership that is sane, not this one that we have currently in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. That's very good. And I want to involve Kharim there. Look, there is a general feeling that most of the people in the diaspora, not just for Uganda, but for many countries on the continent, are usually opposition leaning in the politics. And this is backed by research actually by the International Organization on Migration. They say the reason as to why many African governments have not given priority to the people in the diaspora is because they feel that these people are so much leaning to the opposition, and therefore if they're involved directly, they might influence, so in one way or the other affect the incumbent government. Kharim, what informs your political decisions as people in the diaspora?
Thank you so much, Phillip. I first of all want to disagree that the reason why African governments don't want to involve the diaspora is because the diaspora is opposition leaning. I think it has something to do with infrastructure. For example, we don't have a census for Ugandans in the diaspora. And most of the times when you talk about Ugandans in the diaspora, it's easy for someone to think about Ugandans in the US, in Europe, and they won't be able to think about Ugandans in Comoros Island. They won't be able to think about Ugandans in Angola. So you have to think about Ugandans in a grand scheme of things. I'll give an example. When Uganda passed the law for dual citizenship, and they just thought about how much a Ugandan in the diaspora should pay for reinstatement. They just threw $400, $400 for everyone. Now, a Ugandan in the US and in Europe might be able to have that money real quick. But for Ugandan, maybe living in Zambia, for Ugandan living in South Sudan who has been there and wants to have a dual citizenship, that's a lot of money. And yet, for someone who is in Uganda and they just want to naturalize, it's way cheaper than a Ugandan who wants to have dual citizenship. So the infrastructure is a big thing. For example, if we are to say Ugandans in the diaspora to participate in the coming general elections, we don't have the infrastructure. The elections are not in 2026. By this time next year, the elections for youth leaders on a national level, PWDs, nominations will be at this time. So if you're saying you're going to do reforms to involve the diaspora, you have a small window of time for you to decide. And how do you agree that it's going to be free and fair? Who are going to be who is going to represent the Electoral Commission? Is it going to be something we're doing online? Are we going to have representatives in each country? And who decides those representatives? Because now Uganda is a country which majorly bases on executive fiat. You're going to have the president appoint the electoral leaders in the different countries. And how fair would that be? We have Uganda's come to a situation where the president appoints almost everybody. The only thing we are waiting to see in the next coming few maybe years, if Museveni is still the president, he will be appointing prefects for government primary schools, because that's how entrenched he wants his power to be. So I think it's infrastructure. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the numbers. Like, all those things have to be thought about before you say the diaspora should be able to vote. I am not against the diaspora voting, but I would want for every Ugandan in the diaspora not to choose for only those countries that have access maybe to the internet to do it. And also, how can we ensure, do we have any safeguards? Because we can say, okay, we are voting today, and tomorrow they say, the Ugandans in the DRC were 2 million and they voted. You were focused on the Ugandans in the US, but now they are telling you that the Ugandans we have in Tanzania, they are about 1 million, and all of them voted in favor of the ruling government. It's going to be hard for us to dispute that after the result is out. So the conversation, we should start having the conversation, but I don't think we as Ugandans are ready to have the diaspora vote in the general elections of 2026.
Wow, thank you so much, Kharim, for that. And it doesn't sound so good for the people that are really working hard and interested in seeing this achieved. But Miriam, look, Kharim says it doesn't look like we're going to have that, but there is a feeling that people in the diaspora, because of the exposure that Francis and Albert talked about, you tend to be one over demanding to the governments, and you want to see a lot of things done, yet the governments do not have capacity, and sometimes they say, in a war of cooling of the pressure, they leave you out of the equation. What is about that?
I want to first respond to Karim's grim picture he painted. And, I think, yes, we are lagging behind. If we want to participate in 2026, we should have started yesterday. But as you know, other countries have their diaspora vote. Kenya, they participate in voting. Rwanda, they do the same. I'm bringing East African examples because those are close to us and we know their capacity. It's not much better than ours. And if they can pull it off, we can pull it off. We can't fear to try because there are obstacles. We'd rather try and see the obstacles and deal with them and put measures to overcome them. So yes, it's kind of becoming too late because by this time next year, yes, there will be primaries going on, and for MPs and other special seats would be already along in the process of choosing their representatives. But the most important is the presidential election, since Uganda is basically a highly presidential a lot of power relies in the presidency. We are so much into that system, the presidential electoral system. So if we can start from somewhere, they say that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. How do we take that one step, and where should we take it? We can, there are some alternatives. People suggest that we can choose maybe some of the big places which have majority Ugandan diaspora and start from there. We have to start somewhere somehow. Whether we do it in 2031, we have to start somewhere. Whether we do it 10 years or 20 years from now, we have to take that step. So we can't be scared of moving because we really have to. It's a challenging journey. We would rather start and shape it as we move along. So yes, it's challenge, and the biggest I think the biggest obstacle is the mental perception of our leadership. Most African leaders have not embraced immigration as part of their policy. When we talk about immigration or immigration, people look at the, say, refugees from Rwanda to Uganda, refugees from Congo to Uganda, and some are temporary coming in and they are going out, and some just need shelter and they are going back. And we have not sat down to conceptualize immigrants who have come to stay, immigrants who have come to do business on the long term. Even in Uganda itself, there are people who have come, say, like today, if you move around Kampala, you see like Eritreans, the Somalis are dominating like the fuel sector. They are everywhere, and they are doing those businesses, I'm sure, for a long term. How have we planned for them? Suppose they want to stay longer, suppose they want to integrate in Ugandan community, what are plans on ground for them? We have had like refugees from Rwanda who have stayed for decades in Uganda and have made families and have land and are there to stay for long. But when they come to get their IDs, you see there is a pushback and all that. So at what time do we naturalize people? At what time do we determine this person has come to stay and they are contributing for the economy and they should be part of us? So we don't have to really like go back to a scenario where Idi Amin had to chase all Indians because they are foreigners and they are dominating the economy, you know, because that's what we are waiting for. If we don't put in policies and laws to operationalize the immigrants and how they are going to be integrated in our community, any rag leader might take that gap as an excuse to really do some harmful stuff, and which can't be reversed, and they might destroy economy for good, or they don't even match with other global village. We are now a global village, and we should look at integration on that big picture. Today we have Ugandans. They are Ugandans. I was joking with someone who said, I'm in Kampala. When do you go home? I said I might be going back to my village more times than you personally living in Kampala, because it's as easy as that. We are, like Bakasara said, you are sending money every other time you are participating. There is no difference. The distance now is very minimized, and people must move. People are moving for labor, people are moving for work, for life, people are getting married abroad. So how do you make those people contribute back to your country? How do you harness that rich community that is hanging around, but it's yours, but you don't want to take it up by policy? So if we have a Ugandan diaspora so far, I'm sure we have more than 3 million Ugandans living outside the country. And these are mostly adults, voting age, and these sometimes are professionals, and they are contributing to the economy and they want to participate. Brian had mentioned the diaspora policy, which has been hanging dry on the shelves for the last 10 years plus. It was drafted, I think, in 2013 or sometime back, and nobody has bothered to look back at it. Even the Minister of Finance, which year in year out budgets for remittances, it doesn't pause to look back and say, what policy are we putting here to harness that rich diaspora community that is there? We have people with skills. We have professional doctors who have skills which can benefit Uganda. We have teachers, we have researchers, we have scientists, we have people of all walks of life, and we are not harnessing into that rich resource that is ours, basically, as Ugandans. It belongs to us. The diaspora community wants so much to contribute to development back home, but the people back home I don't think they even conceptualize the idea. I don't think they have the clear picture of what it means and what it should. It's like they need, some do and are ignoring, but some don't, especially our policymakers. So how do we make them understand the importance of diaspora? We maybe participate in elections, they can think about us, because these policymakers will be trying to campaign in our community, and they will be like, what are they thinking about us? What are they thinking about environment? What do they think about the public service? So elections is one way of integrating the diaspora community to the home community politically and
Thank
policy.
you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Miriam. But you talk about this policy and how it has been in the shelves for too long. Brian, what are you planning to do differently, and indeed how are you going to convince this government that has had this document for quite a while to finally adopt it and see that the community out there is given priority in the affairs of this country, this Brian?
Yeah,
Mr.
so sorry, the Empire gotten distracted. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes, thank you so much. And I was saying, look, government has had this process and has had all the documents looked at and worked on, but they're on the shelf for too long. What are you planning to do differently to convince this government to finally adopt this policy and see that things are better for the country in relations with the diaspora community?
Yeah, just give, I think what we're trying to do differently is first of all, what we're doing right now, engaging people like you, engaging the media. We're gonna, I think, engage the media a little bit some more than we've done previously. I think when the government sees the diaspora, kind of, I think, silent, they just send the money. They don't hear them making noise. They don't hear them complaining about anything. They think everything is okay. They think they are satisfied with everything. So I think what we're trying to do different this time is be maybe a little bit more vocal about our needs, about our plans. So I think that's not something we've done previously before. So I think something we've mostly maybe a little bit behind the scene. But this time around, I think we want to be a little bit more vocal and have maybe more public debates and kind of shape the outcome of whatever policy or whatever law is passed, as opposed to taking a backbencher seat and hoping that the government is going to get it right.
Yes, Brian, thank you. But look, many times it has become normal in this country that whoever wants to see their idea or activity given priority in the country, they have to meet up with the president and convince the person of the president. And indeed, when that happens, everything else can flow their way. Is that one of the options you have, meeting the president to convince him about this idea?
As the Americans like to say, every option is on the table. But before you even meet the president, you have to have something. So you have to engage the technocrats in the different ministries. You have to have the draft policy. You have to talk. It's like you're saying, it's 10 years old. So you have to talk to them if maybe there's a need to change it as it is. So we are not ruling out everything. All options are on the table. What we care about is getting this thing passed by cabinet, by parliament. We don't care what we have to do to get it passed. We are willing to do everything.
Thank you so much, Brian. And I want to bring in Mr. Bakasara here. Mr. Bakasara, look, one of the unique qualities or characteristics of the Rwandese policy is that before they engaged the community, one of the things they did was identification of wherever their peoples are and trying to make sure they have a database for these peoples. How much has the government of Uganda, or has it anyway, done any mapping in terms of finding the location of Ugandans from around the world and indeed taking data from them to know who is this person and where are they, and indeed what are they doing for the country, or what can they do for the country? Have you been approached by the government to know who you are and where you are and what you're doing?
Thank you, Phil, for the question. The easy answer is no, but I have a feeling you already know that. But I want to echo what Brian just said. We do this time around, we actually want to have these serious engagements, because I don't even believe that when the diaspora policy was initiated or passed 9 or 10 years ago, I don't think we had a seat at the table. I can be corrected. This time we want a seat at the table. I understand, and we had a question here, a discussion between Kharim and Francis regarding whether this is a political or infrastructure kind of deal. I think that's a false question to ask, because I think it's both. It is true that most of the people, and not just Ugandans, everywhere in the diaspora, people usually leave their countries, not because they hate their countries, not because they want to go live in foreign countries where they don't know anybody and start new lives. They usually either are economic refugees or political refugees. So let's agree that, yeah, for a government that has been in power for a long, long time, there are a whole bunch of people who have left because of either the policies, the economic policies of the regime, or the political policies of the regime. So it is true that if you were to have a fair election, especially here in our diaspora in North America, the NRM government would lose. that's a fact. Okay. So let's not move away from that, because if we keep putting these false choices, we're not going to have a frank discussion. It's also true that the government of Uganda, through directly and indirectly, has neglected us. You ask, when you see opposition politicians coming to the US and even those participating in Ugandan politics, the belief in the government circles is that, oh, they are being supported by foreigners, and the president of Uganda has repeated this several times. He really has no clue of who we are. And if somebody doesn't know you, they can't value you. His intelligence or whatever people have told him is that we are here, we oppose the government, we hate Uganda, and we are taking money from whoever it is. One day it's the Obama administration, the next day it's the Biden administration, the next day it's the homosexual elites. Whatever it is that he thinks we're getting money, it's like somehow we don't work. We just stand up here and go beg for white people to give us money to destabilize our own countries, which can't be far from the truth. And again, so we cannot have these false questions of, well, is there all this infrastructure or is it political? They are one and the same. The lack of the proper infrastructure originates from the lack of interest from the political class in Uganda. So it's one and the same. So is this really something hard for us to accomplish? I don't think so. As Miriam said, other countries have done it. The luxury of doing this at the end, of not being the first, is that we don't get to reinvent the wheel. People are doing this. The US has been doing this for a long, long time. Okay, they actually do it the easy way. They don't have representation in those countries, because once we put in the political representation and maybe even voting at embassies, because embassies are political entities, whether we want to believe it or not. So we don't want to do that. Okay, a good example is the embassy in Canada. So you just saw the ambassador being sent back for having a fight in the streets with the political oppositional political activists. So imagine that's the political officer who is going to oversee the election. How fair is that going to be? Okay, so we can copy an easy model like the US has. Everyone who has registered in the diaspora to receive a Ugandan ID would have also presented an address in Uganda, where they were born, where they originate from. If you did not get an ID by presenting that information, then I'm not sure what we can do there. But if we have that basic belief that that's what happened, I Bakasara, told people that I come from Kitumba in Fort Portal municipality, then they have, and I applied for an ID, I'm in the diaspora, so they have my address here, and they know where I come from. It's not rocket science for them to mail me either a ballot or secure online portal to cast my vote directly to go to the EC. It's really not rocket science. The technology is there. And if we don't have the technology, then give me the option to mail it and collect them at the US Post Office. Give us a PO box and we will mail them. Even if it's on our own dime, we will mail them and then they can count them and we can participate both at the local level and at the presidential level. Because I think Brian had talked and others were saying, well, maybe we could do this at the presidential level this year and then move on to the other levels. No, we don't have to do any of that because all the information, the infrastructure and everything we need to participate fully is there. So I appreciate you. And like Brian said, we need to engage people like you. We need to engage the media. But I don't believe that this is a maybe we should do this. No, it should be done. It should be done. It can be done. And again, it's going to be on us this time to actually educate even the president, to educate the president. You're talking about us asking him. No, he doesn't know us. He doesn't care about us. He doesn't even have a full picture of us because it's what his political people have told him who we are. Oh, we are these Ugandan haters and all that. That's what he's operating from. That's where he's operating from. So Brian is right. We need to engage these fellow people here before we even get to him, because he has people whispering lies and all this nonsense in his ears, and he has a view of us. And if that's the view, then he's not going to care about us. So I'll stop there. But thank you so much for the question.
Many things are being done, but since the ears of the people in charge are certainly not interested in the music being sung, or perhaps there's another reason. How can regional bodies like the East African Community and the African Union contribute to this cause? And the African Union Agenda 2063, they talk about having all the 54 countries allowing their diaspora communities to participate in their democratic processes, including the election, but also offering dual citizenship to all Africans outside the continent by 2025. Do you see these bodies like the African Union and the East African Community and COMESA, SADC, and all these others have something to contribute to this particular cause we have? Yes, Francis.
Thank you, moderator, and other fellow panelists. Like as I have said, all these are wonderful ideas. Yes, I echo the words of Brian. He talked about infrastructure. But for me, I narrow it down to leadership and planning, like as I had said at first. Because if we don't have that being planned, if we have not come together as the East African community, for example, economically have one type of shilling, then we say, is this integration or the East African community, is it going also to come together politically? But now about the free trade, we have tried to do that. But now when it comes to economics, can we just have like one shilling? So when all those integrations have reached fruition, it's when you can begin dreaming of the bigger picture of Africa. I think that's where we should be beginning from. I do not necessarily agree with Brian where he said that the people in the diaspora are not known. No, we are known. Again, I take it back to poor leadership. Most people who pass, very few, by the way, are smuggled out of Uganda. People who pass going to other countries, they pass through the airport. Is it my responsibility to go and register myself in the immigration that I have moved to a given country or somewhere? It is the responsibility by now of government to be telling us that it knows people who have exited the country, and there are so many. It can even project that we, because of the volume of people going, we project or we estimate we have so much people in such and such a country. Then, of course, the rest of the things would follow. Bakasara hinted that these embassies are political entities. It is rare to find that even when they say we should go and register at embassies of countries where we are. I'll give an example of the US, the embassy. You want a person to come from California to come to DC, spends almost $2,000 to come and register at the embassy, because they have failed to embrace what the opportunities, what the modern world is providing. If you go on the website, you will not find that maybe here you can register and so on, and immediately you will get a response. Generally, yes, yesterday but one, I was calling our Ugandan embassy in DC. I called for 3 hours. Nobody was speaking. I think all of them were in the UN General Assembly. But is that the way how a country should be run, if that is what is representing us? So there is a lot that we need to do. For me, I still believe that it is a good thing. But how have we planned it? Where is the infrastructure that we are talking about? You hinted also about maybe meeting these leaders. I'm sorry. Let me use the word of President Museveni when he said he elected the cabinet of fishermen. Now think of, again, I'm sorry, Bakasara, to use you. Now you bring a specialist like Bakasara or even Brian himself to go and meet fishermen to discuss something that is very important. Do you think they will listen? Chances are high they may not listen. But for us, I would say that even when we, the diaspora, begin organizing ourselves, and I have always said that government comes in to disorganize. I agree with Bakasara, where people are feeding either the presidents in Africa with false information that all people who are outside, they don't like, they hate the governments and so on. But they should not be political amateurs to an extent that they just fear anything. If you are indeed a sane leader, you should be able to engage, listen to if they are dissenting voices anyway. But in most cases, the issues that we raise are genuine. The issues that we raise are fundamental. The issues that we raise are issues of the 21st century. But most of our leaders, including Museveni, they use a rudimentary approach to solve a modern problem, and we have bypassed that. And so if we don't come back on the board and these leaders decide, like I have said, to listen to us, our countries are being ruined and they are left behind because of not saying we can listen to the diaspora. I would again echo that even when we organize ourselves, and I have always said, the way how the NRM government broke down the UNA, you can't believe it. But this was an association that was focused on development, focused on how do we get investors and so on and so forth, development oriented. But of course, as we root for all these developments, we have to say, what is the environment? What environment should be seen at home? Of course, for other opportunities to thrive, you must look at both the political, the social, and economic environment. And that's where sometimes we come in critical to say, no, this is not right, and so on and so forth. Like now, shoot one person or tear gas a person on the street, information will just run like bushfire, and then it will reach somewhere. So an investor, it takes you hard time to convince an investor should come to Uganda, and will say, no, where they are shooting people on streets, people are being mistreated like this. So all these we need to have a candid conversation. And then of course, the stamping out corruption. And you have seen for Uganda, corruption generally, the architect of corruption is Museveni himself. He has bribed the MPs to remove the age limit, has bribed the MPs to remove the term limit, and he even goes ahead. Do you still remember when he said if they are asking about Rubawa Hospital, if they are asking about the coffee, they should not question Paynet, they should instead crucify Museveni? And then look at all that confusion that was behind the Paynet saga. So you really ask yourself, what type of country are we trying to build? What type of leaders are they planning? And even when, for me, you say maybe a person can meet the president, Do you think even he can listen to these technical ideas from the diaspora? Not until they sit down, and which I know they do it on purpose, because they know the moment the diaspora comes in, we have in conjunction with people who are at home collaborating with them, they are brilliant ideas. Like Brian said, there are people from Angola, there are people from Kenya who are Ugandans in Kenya, from Egypt, from where, from the US, name all those areas. But when we all bring ideas together, we can come up with a blend of either policies or infrastructure that can move our country forward. But because our leaders are egocentric, then they can't allow that to see the light. But otherwise, I still insist that whether they say we are in opposition, the fact is, when they do something wrong, we shall always say it is wrong. And for them, they brand it opposition. We are trying to help. That is a building block to say, hey, you are doing this. This is not right. This is not how things should move. Or these are alternative. Generally, we normally have alternative policies or ideas about things, not necessarily that we are opposing. Because there is no way how a person from the diaspora has ever seen they are constructing Entebbe Express Highway, and we say that should not be constructed. We have never said that. The only thing we say, the money that you have spent, is it worth? We try to compare. If another country constructed so much kilometers and used half of the money that we use, for us, what is it that you put in that road that consumed 3 times more than what other countries have done? And then is that opposition, or we are intervening for the sake of other Ugandans to seek for accountability and proper management of state affairs? So not until those institutions that the NRM government has demolished to the marrows are rejuvenated, of course NRM should be out of power. Uganda will not see infrastructure, will not see policies, will not see let's say good development in as far as what we want to see is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. I hope the engagement of the diaspora in the electoral process will see that goal that you have of taking out the NRM achieved. But look, Kharim, Francis talks about the many Ugandans in different countries, and he talks about organization. Look, we have many Ugandans in the Middle East. You have Ugandans in many African countries. You talk about North America, South America, and in Asia. How are these Ugandans organized, and how easy can it be for government, but also the people like yourself and Brian here, Albert here, in trying to bring them together to be participants in this particular cause?
Thank you. Like I said earlier, we as Ugandans, we have our small community organizations that bring us together in the diaspora. But to participate in such a big national election, it needs a lot. It needs government involvement, and you could see in certain places where the government has tried to be involved, they have got pushback because there is no goodwill from the government to work with people in the diaspora. I would cite what has been going on in places like the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, where so many young people are. The relationship between young people who are working in those areas and the government is not so good. At least here we can, you can raise your hand and call the embassy and say all your frustrations, and maybe they will hear you. But in places, you've had incidences where young people have been tortured within the embassy. Somebody, complains about, work. They go to the embassy to see if they can get redress, and they are being tortured in the embassy premises of Uganda. We've had these cases. So it's going to take us a while before we build a relationship between the Ugandans in the diaspora and the government. to come up with such a working relation, which is based on national interest, not political interest. However, like Albert said, these embassies are political entities. They are not looked at as national entities where someone who has business or somebody who is interested in bringing something, for Uganda can rush to. You can only closely work with them if you are aligned with the ruling party's ideology. That's the best you can get. However, Miriam said not starting doesn't mean not starting would be worse. I think the conversation should be started about how we as Ugandans in the diaspora can engage. My contention is that we are not ready for 2026. We have a few months to start the pre-elections. We haven't even figured out the kind of infrastructure that needs to be done. I'm going to remind you that during the presidential election last year, now in 2021, government shut down internet. Social media was shut down. Now, if we are benching, if you are looking at using maybe the internet and you're working in an environment where internet can be shut off by government for 2 weeks, we won't know what's going on. I remember in 2021, by the was it the 14th of January, I had most of my friends, their cell phones had been personally targeted. You wouldn't reach them; they had been cut off, or you would call from a third party to reach them. So that's the kind of environment that we are looking at. So if we are to do electoral reforms, before we even talk about the diaspora being engaged, is the work on the ground free and fair? Have we cultivated an environment where a Ugandan can trust in their ballot? Have we put safeguards that are enough for Ugandan in the diaspora to know that, I'm participating in this, electoral experiment, and I do believe that the results would reflect what I'm really looking for. For example, I've seen people floating electoral reforms, but must I remind you that even as of today, we have Ugandans who were arrested in 2021 in the pre, intra, and post elections that they haven't, been able to be released. You have people who were tortured that have never received justice. You still have the same kind of environment that the Electoral Commission, the polling centers and the polling agents mostly are being appointed by the same system. So until we curate a kind of a system where all parties are involved, where we are not being told that the RDC has a hand in the election, can stand at a polling station and say this should go, this is what should be done. We are not ready. We must say, okay, let's say the diaspora is voting. Are we trusting the kind of environment in which these elections are being, had? Why shouldn't we, first of all, push for reforms on the ground that make this, process free and fair? Where we, I would give an example. One of the things that I'm interested in knowing, when do we pull out? When does the Electoral Commission say this is not free and fair? So what are the safeguards? How many people must be killed for us to decide that this has gone too far? How many people should be tortured? Those are some of the things personally I'm interested in. That if the violence reaches this extent, maybe we should put a foot onto the brake and say, hold on, maybe this is not free and fair. Maybe let's annul this election and try it again. Otherwise, if we are going to work in the same environment, we are going to have the same, militarized kind of process we are going to have a one-sided kind of representation at the Electoral Commission, we are not going to achieve. We are going to be in the same revolving door. So whereas there is need, whereas there is enthusiasm from the people of the diaspora to participate, me, I'm interested in how free and fair this process can be. Otherwise, what we would be doing will be acquiescing to the fact that Uganda, is doing a free and fair election. You can see even the diaspora is participating, everyone is engaged. It will contribute onto the notion that even though people are saying the elections were a little bit violent, but for the people who participated from the diaspora, it was 100% free and fair because nobody touched anybody in the diaspora. I don't want us to be in a situation where we are acquiescing to such talking points. I would stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kharim, for that. It's rather powerful you talk about. And Miriam, if I come to you, earlier I asked Albert about how much the government has done in trying to identify which Ugandans are where and what they're doing, and he said government is doing little or nothing in that regard. I want to ask you, and with your background, working with refugees and your special interest in that area, is government in any way assisting people that leave this country as refugees and go to other countries? And you remember last year we had a story where Ugandans were in Myanmar and things didn't work out well for them, and a couple of many Ugandans leave this country not peacefully. Is government doing anything to help these kind of people out there?
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs intervenes once in some cases, but the effort is I don't want to call it lukewarm, but it's not enough. The intervention is there, but sometimes it comes too late. Sometimes it's more pronounced in bigger cases, and some people are ignored. So we still have a lot of work to do in that aspect, but I would like to respond to some issues that Kharim raised. Mr. Kharim, the election, the way I understand election, it's not just a process of voting. Election is one of those processes where you engage your government and your leadership in all aspects. That's where you share your interests. That's where they discuss policy. That's where you raise awareness. It's a platform to interact, and the interaction takes some time. If, for instance, we are going to vote, the diaspora was to vote in the presidential elections, the president would be interested even in knowing how many Ugandans are in diaspora. If the law, the parliament passes the bill that diaspora should vote, it's upon the Electoral Commission, NIRA, and people registering voters to step out of their comfort zone and go look for Ugandans who are eligible to vote from the diaspora. And when you operationalize that, we get to the budget. We are pushed at the center stage. And it's the only way we can join the national agenda in policy making. That's the only way to integrate the diaspora agenda into the mainstream national policy planning and development. So let's not look at election as just the voting process, but to look at the build-up. So if today you are going to vote for your MP, the MP will take interest to look for your needs. And you also have a platform to express your interest on what do you want your MP to do. That's when we get a chance to interact about, say, how did this happen? You talk to your MP if you are from Kampala. Where was your MP today? I expected Honorable Nsereko to be here so that we can even ask him such a question. That's the platform. So when you mentioned that they will close the internet, no, they cannot, because they want to connect with the diaspora to get our votes. So they can't close that platform. And if they cut it off, that makes all the process null and void. And the international observers will be watching. Because if we have extended the diaspora to be a constituency, that constituency has to be served by government government facilities, which includes the Electoral Commission, the observers, and everybody will be watching. So let's not assume that the process is going to happen behind the box, maybe internet, whatever, and it just goes like that. It just opens up all the spaces and will be entitled observers to facilitation like any other voters countrywide. And for me, I look at it as that's the opportunity we are looking for. And even the policy that has been on table and nobody's looking at, when do we get to discuss it? Or like Philip asked, how many Ugandans are in diaspora? We even don't know. And where should we concentrate the energy? What are they doing there? What are Ugandans doing in Sudan? Are there people who are stranded and they want to come back home? What are challenges? What is the embassy doing right and what is the embassy doing wrong? Every other day, Albert and Francis will tell you on this talk show, we always telling the Minister of Foreign Affairs to do much more about in staffing their embassies. Their embassies are understaffed, and like he said, you put in a call and nobody even picks the phone call. So it's through elections that they are going to facilitate those embassies to really have enough capacity to support all Ugandans in diaspora or in that particular area. Because by engaging them, you even know the numbers of the people that are there and the services they need, and you provide them accordingly. So let's not look at election as just that particular vote you are going to put in a box. Even if the vote was rigged, even if the vote got messed up, I mean, after all, even the national votes back home are rigged and whatever, but they don't stop the process from going on. We can make it better as we go along, but let's look at the opportunity the whole exercise provides us, avails us, that big platform, that big opportunity to engage, that big opportunity to be part of the national policy making, that big opportunity to influence the legislature. So let's look at that big picture and that big platform the election process will provide us, and it's as an instrument, not just the real thing. That one is like it's like the spice on the cake, but the icing on the cake, but there is that big other picture we shouldn't lose out.
Thank you so much for your discussion. Brian, as we talk about the voting and the participation and all the civil activities in the country by the diaspora community, there is a bill coming to the floor of Parliament very soon, brought by Parliamentary Commission or former leader of opposition, the Honorable Matthias Mpuga, that talks about, among other things, yes, allowing the diaspora community to vote, allowing the prison community to vote. Talks about reducing the size of parliament from the 529 we have to get to about 292. It talks about creating another house, in other words, having something that is related to what you have in the United States, where you have two houses where we shall have the lower parliament and the upper parliament, and the upper one will be having, it talks about 39 members coming from the original 39 districts of the country, and a series of other things he talks about. But briefly on those 3 points, 2 parliaments, reducing the number of MPs, but also allowing the 2 communities. What's your reaction to this bill, and do you think it's a good one at such a time in the country? Yes, Brian.
Yeah, I'll answer your question, but let me first go back to the diaspora issues a little bit, and then I'll come back to that. But so Albert and Francis mentioned something about we need to vote for the local leaders as well, not just the presidential election. So I just want to make a point of clarification. The local leadership is not based on where you are born. Just like someone can be born in Toro, like Albert, but they reside in Kampala, so they vote for an MP for Kampala Central because that's where they reside, that's where they are registered. So the issue, the reason I think Miriam mentioned, for this time maybe we can do the presidential whatever, because of the lack of the institution, whatever. The point is, so the government of Uganda, knowing where you stay and where you are from, doesn't tell them anything about where in Uganda, doesn't tell them anything about which constituency, which MP you should vote for. You may have been born in Toro, but you've not lived there for 30 years. So which MP should you vote for? That's what about another person who maybe was born in Toro, but they want to vote for an MP in Kampala? And then, of course, that means you'd have 10 different ballots to different parts of the world for the different. So the whole point is that I think having the local constituencies at this stage may be too complicated. So I think that's why people like Miriam are advocating, okay, for now we can go maybe for the presidential election, which is a little bit more straightforward, because then the different people in the diaspora belong to different constituencies in Uganda, and then which constituents are you going to decide? Is it the last address they lived in Uganda? Is it where they were born? That kind of stuff. And typically, the reason the local, I think, become complicated as well. For example, if someone wants to run for an MP, they're usually registered in that constituency that they vote in. Obviously, for someone in the diaspora, they don't have that. So anyway, that I wanted to add that little detail. And then I also wanted to respond to Bakasara again, where he said the majority of the people in the diaspora are opposition leaning and all that. I think that is up for debate. But even if for the sake of argument they were, I think government moving in implementing some of these issues that concern the diaspora, I think would move some of the people who may be opposition leaning towards government. So then government will be responding to their issues. I think we've seen this happen in several parts of Uganda, where government has responded to the different issues people have. Government ended the war in northern Uganda and that kind of stuff, and now the north is solidly pro-government, whatever. And in other areas, maybe where they have foreign short, like central Uganda, those areas have tilted towards opposition. So these things are dynamic. They are not static. They can change depending on the prevailing whatever. So okay, partly that policy is the incentive for the NIM to win more ground, and before you know it, Miriam will be Honorable Mpuga posted. I think there's I know in my piece I advocated for representation from the diaspora, and some people were pushing back saying, "Oh, Brian, we're trying to reduce the size of parliament. You're trying to increase it." No, not really. We're just saying if the national cake is being divided and every little county or sub-county is made into constituency, they are getting representations. You have a huge chunk of about 2 million plus people in diaspora who are not represented at all. So if we're going to slice and divide our country into little constituencies so we can maximize representation, then certainly the diaspora wants a part of that national cake, so to speak. After all, we are the biggest contributor to Uganda's GDP in terms of foreign exchange, above tourism and above coffee. So if we are dividing the national cake, then let us give each sector, each segment of our population their due. But if we now want to move in a different direction, where we are reducing the size of parliament, I'm okay with that, and I support Mpuga's approach of maybe having an upper house and a lower house. And the reason for that is simple. Part of having a smaller constituencies is you tend to have people who are quote unquote more tribal. And I don't mean that in the sense of Ugandan tribes per se. You can see it even in the US here. The lower house, the House of Representatives is more tribal than the Senate, which is more quote unquote national in terms of the issues they focus on. And there's room in national representation. There's room for both. You need to have people who are going to think strategically in terms of Uganda's national interests, in terms of our troops in Somalia, our troops in South Sudan, foreign affairs. You need to have people in parliament who think at that level. But at the same time, you need to have someone who realizes that there's no primary school in the local constituency. And sometimes it is difficult to have both people in one individual. So that's why the US has it the way they have it, partly, among other reasons, but partly is to balance the need to have the local issues come up to the national fora, but at the same time have a national legislative body that can debate national affairs. But I think some lawyer friend of mine said some of one of the things that Honorable Mpuga suggested, like the results being declared at the district level or the polling station level, it's already the law in the country. So it's maybe a case of the law not being followed, but that is actually already the law. So passing another law that says the same thing, I don't think would add much value to it. But anyway, for now, that's it for now.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kwesiga Brian. Mr. Albert Bakasara, the Honorable Mpuga brings a couple of things to the table. A deputy president that is a running mate. You talk about entrenchment of term limits into the constitution again. You talk about reducing the number of MPs and creating a two-tier parliament, among other things, and of course the voting of the diaspora and the prisons community. Your reaction to that, sir?
Thank you, Philip. Well, again, I want to thank you and the panelists here, especially Brian, who's taken on to championing this idea. This is why we have these conversations. I want to start, before I answer your question, Philip, let me start again by maybe clarifying on what I meant and disagree with Brian slightly on saying we can't do this at the presidential and local levels at the moment. I understand what Brian is saying because, we might have different places and in Uganda now we want to choose. But that's exactly what I'm suggesting. We start off by saying, you, Albert Bakasara, for now we have put you on the address that you gave us, that you were from when you applied for this ID, and that's Tumba in Fort Portal municipality. If I have moved and went to Mbarara, then it's upon me to notify the government, the electoral commission to say, you know what, I moved. I'm updating my address now. I no longer live in Toro. I no longer live in Fort Portal municipality. Now I'm in Wakiso. So that to me is not really a hiccup that should stop the process from going forward, because somehow you have a house in Fort Portal and a house in Kampala. Americans do that all the time. You can have a house in Texas and now you live in Virginia. You choose where you're going to vote. As long as you have identification for that place and you've declared this is your residence. So that should not, we shouldn't really overthink this and make it so difficult that people start using some of these things to deny us the opportunity to vote. Also, it goes back to what Kharim was saying earlier. If we want, and Miriam, if we want to participate in this local problem solving, you can't say, let's only vote at the presidential level. We have very little impact at the presidential level. We're not going to make a difference at the presidential level in as far as, because, and I'm saying that because none of Uganda's elections has been by a margin of, let's say, less than 1 million. Okay. We are, by many estimates, we're about maybe 500,000 Ugandans that are outside Uganda. I don't remember a presidential election that has ever been declared by that as a margin. But in small local elections, those margins will make a difference. Because if there are 1,000, 2,000 people in Wakiso in some constituency here, we can decide who the MP is. And then that MP can channel our concerns to Parliament. Now, to your question on Honorable Mpuga's suggestion, some are good, some are just a product of his political intrigue. For example, I don't agree that we should have, I don't agree that we should have 2 houses. One house has failed to be managed. Now you want to add on another one? And then when they say we should slim down the Parliament, slim it down to what? This is you have to remember, these are the same people who are going to be voting on that slimming down. Unless they want to put it to a national referendum, then we can, the voters can chime in. But if it's the same Parliament that is going to vote on reducing their numbers, it has 0 chance of passing. Okay, these are people who are depending on the largesse of the taxpayer. They are not going to cut their jobs. A sensible alternative would be a part-time Parliament. One house that sits in session about 4 months, and then it's disbanded for the rest of the year. Then they reconvene for another 4 months. So they can, instead of being so dependent on the taxpayer for their day-to-day livelihood, they should go out there and get jobs like the rest of us. Then for 2-3 months when they are in session, they can be paid their allowances. Again, we don't have to reinvent these things. Ask anybody here on this panel. There are several American states do that already. As a matter of fact, I want to say the majority of states in the US have part-time legislatures. They don't sit all year round. No. If there is an issue or there are issues, the governor of that state convenes the legislature and they pass the bills they have to pass. Then they go back home and go become doctors and farmers and do all that. The idea, this idea that we have as Africans, where we've congregated some of our biggest and best brains, and they just sit all year yapping at each other, doing nothing, having the taxpayers carrying the, the obligations of feeding them, housing them, driving them. It's really insane. Okay, so if Mr. Mpuga really wants to have an impact, that is something that he should be championing. Okay, that hey, let's have a part-time minimum parliament. Actually, if it's part-time, it might even stay as large as it is. No, it wouldn't concern me, but it's part-time. If they can't do that, then they should do what New Hampshire does. New Hampshire legislatures have no salary. Take the money out and see how many of them want to actually volunteer and serve. Take the money out. You want to be, volunteer. And this is not something that is so out of the blue. As a matter of fact, how many years did the LC1s, LC2s in Uganda serve without ever getting a salary? They served. Let the parliament serve without a salary. Okay, but this idea of dependency, I don't think it's going to work. They're not going to cut their own jobs because that's what they have turned the parliament into a den of, I don't even want to say it, but they depend on it. So they're not going to cut it. But anyway, to our conversation, and I know we're reaching to the end of the hour, I want to honestly thank you for having this conversation. And to Brian, this is exactly what we do here. I know this is his first time, but this is what we do here. We hope to have him. And Brian, I promise I will join you, and I'll pray Miriam, you Kamuhanda, anybody who wants to have this conversation, I will join you on these forums. Let's have this conversation, and these people that we're talking about, let's also have them join us. Usually when they come to our events here, either through UNA or other forums, they usually talk at us. We want now to have a conversation with them. If they don't believe we have something to contribute, then they can continue doing what they've been doing. But honestly, what they have been doing is not working. Maybe they do need some help. They may look down on us as incubators and stuff, but we have something to contribute. And as you began this conversation by asking where we are here. We're in these places. We've planted a Ugandan flag, and we do have something to contribute. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bakasara, for that. Mr. Kamuhanda, the bill, Honorable Mpuga wants a presidential running mate, he wants a reduced parliament, he wants two houses, the lower and the upper. He talks about term limits and a couple of other things, but also we know that there is another, information coming out of cabinet is that the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, the Honorable Norbert now, is bringing particular amendments, and among them is such that we go into a parliamentary system. Your reaction to one, the Mpuga bill, but also what may come out later from the Norbert Mao amendments? Yes, Francis.
Oh, thank you, the moderator and fellow panelists. This has been an interesting debate, and I'm always excited being part of this panel. Number one, on the suggestion of Mpuga and what Bakasara has said, for me, I have always routed for, if we decentralize some of these parliaments, because some of the things they talk about are regional or local issues. And therefore, for me, if we go back and say, for example, if each district only sends 2 members of parliament, a man and a woman, then the rest of these constituencies, for example, we have a regional parliament at Imbarara, another regional parliament at another area like that, Western, like how we have these regions. Number one, it would mean that somebody who is a member of parliament for a given constituency in Bushenyi can drive early morning from his home and drives to Imbarara to go and attend a session. And it would also mean, as how Bakasara has said, it would also mean that we are not going to pay you 30 millions per month. Generally, you are entitled to maybe 1 million a month. And therefore, the 30 million that they are currently earning can be money that can facilitate around maybe 30 MPs. If indeed they are about serving the communities. And then the other parliament, the original parliament, now where we have 2, then it would move to that level. To me, that was always my thinking. And sometimes you find that if we do that, we will cut the costs. Like, for example, recently they were taking parliament to go and sit in regions to be able to attend to the problems of that particular region. So it means equally my thinking can help into that and minimize the cost. Now, for the suggestions but then if they bring up that, I would not see any problem for us to also be the first in Uganda to have a member of parliament for the diaspora who is either even discussing and attending parliamentary session from the diaspora, because that's why we have technology. I also believe that our constituency, if we say Bakasara will always take it upon himself, because always now parliament I see it is always live, broadcasted live. So Bakasara, if he's our MP, for example, or any other person is elected, can attend the session. And that is what we would also wish to see if it is an issue of being equally represented. I also do agree with Bakasara that where we have reached, this politics that reaches at a national level, it is built from the grassroots. I should be able to influence, I should be able to participate in an election at the LC1 where I come from, at LC3, and so on and so forth. That's how we are going to build our political hygiene going up. For sure, yes, the presidential may not be something important if we don't build the grassroots, and then we come on building one step at a time until we reach the presidential elections, and then we say, okay, now we can get this. Now, the reforms that Mao is bringing, I still believe that they may not help us much. Why? Because President Museveni knows how to go around each and every aspect. These reforms, yes, they may come, they will be debated on the floor of parliament, which some of them I don't agree with if it is true that parliament, we can go to parliamentary, like democracy, the parliamentarians elect a president. Then you are denying us, you have been defranchising us, and you are continuing to defranchise us up to the maximum. And it is evident that would mean that this time, if it goes through, then Museveni would be easily bribing bribing his way out. Because if he managed to bribe the MPs to remove the age limit, to remove the term limit, then what would happen? Because our MPs also, most of them, a significant number, they don't know why they are in parliament. I'm sorry to say so. Because if they were there specifically to champion the interests of the citizens and to build a Uganda that works for all, they would not be behaving like, as how Dr. Virete said, behaving like hungry monkeys, just waiting to snatch bananas and feed themselves. So that's what we are lacking. Not until we say, even when these reforms come, but they are finding an environment, a political environment that is not clean. Brian talked of people being incarcerated because of having a different political view, people being tortured because of having a different political ideology or a dissenting voice, the civic space being narrowed. Even if you bring as many good policies, as many reforms as you can, there is nothing that can be helped. Then number two, I don't see the reason. For me, if you ask me, we would rather leave them. We had enough time. Now, why is it that towards an election, it's when we are rushing? So that's the mistake we normally do. They are going to rush through this. They bring those funny reforms that do not fundamentally address the inherent problem within our election or within the way how we elect our leaders and so on. And because the election is near, and then we end up getting these shaky and grounded kind of policies or reforms, and then again the same cycle goes back and back. As how you have seen some of these reforms that they are trying to bring, they had ever been plotted on floor of parliament, but where did they end? So this cyclic kind of going back and forth, it does not help. Because look at the other developed countries like the US, name the UK and so on, those who have a constitution that was made so many years back, but it still stands the test of time. Because people think through and sit, analyze, and be able to, by the time they bring out something, indeed you find that it can stand a test of time. And that's what we need. And how do we do that? Not until in Uganda we accept that we can involve everyone. I'm also a kind of person who inclined to the thinking that it's not all those that are educated because they can speak English that they understand what it means to be human. No. Yeah, we have seen where our grandfathers were ridge leaders of some villages and how they would arbitrate cases at a local level. They are even better than some of the quank magistrates and lawyers that we have currently. They are even better debaters in their local language and how issues are looked at than some of the MPs who maybe know a ton of English and so on. So I still think that there is a lot of the electoral reforms that we need to look into than just superficial or seeing something that has been tweeted and then we jump on that. I still believe that there is a lot that we need to deeply analyze and then be able to reach real reforms that we all need than rushing, like as how we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamuhanda Francis, for that detailed recommendation. And Kharim, your suspended deputy president has a series of things to say to us, a bill coming to parliament that has all those details. What's your reaction to that?
Thank you so much. I think I've seen the recommendations from Mr. Mpuga. I should say I agree with some of the panelists what they have been saying, like Mr. Bakasara. There is need to shrink the time that Parliament sits, maybe to help us cut costs. However, when I look at the reforms that Mr. Mpuga introduced, do those reflect his constituents' need? Is that what the electorate wants? I mean, this kind of top-down approach to service delivery, I think is what is wrong with our community. Because for some of these recommendations, I think you have to listen to your people. Is this the most pressing things that we want? Like I said earlier, if we are not looking at ways we can stop the violence, none of this talks about free and fair. And that's the most, contentious issue during, the elections in Uganda is knowing whether the process is going to be free and fair from pre, intra to post. So none of his recommendations talks about that. So I don't know whether we are going to still operate in the same environment with these provisions. 2, things like term limit and age limit. Those things I think would need a referendum as Ugandans, but if we say you're going to take it to the same parliament that passed it, I think, you know, you're singing to the choir. I don't think they will be able to reverse this, looking at the Ugandan parliament as is. So such things would need us to have a referendum as a people and say, you know, is this the way we want to go? Should we shrink parliament? Should we go back to the term limit and age limits? Those are issues that we as the people should be able to vote on. The other issue I have with these reforms is timing. Now, I find them very gaslighting at this time because they've had, 5 years. If you're bringing them at this time, you want to create a polarized community for political expedience. Because even if you bring them right now, you are only going to create an environment where our elections are create unnecessary tension and unnecessary divide and unnecessary, way of diverting Ugandans from the issues that they really want to, to talk about, which is one, releasing all political prisoners, making sure that by the time we get into the elections, we don't have any political prisoners who was arrested 5 years ago, still in prison. We have to make sure that there are safeguards, there are reforms within the Electoral Commission and how it handles its business. I think that should be the starting point. If you don't have a reformed body that handles the election, even if you have these reforms, it's like you're putting lipstick on a pig. It's still going to be the same thing. You're putting the same. You are just changing the bottle of the wine, but the content is still the same. You are not going to be able to redress some of these injuries that that the system has created. So for Mr. Mpuga's reforms, I think he has to go back to the electorate and talk to them about the exact reforms that people want, not what he thinks that his people want. The ones that I saw, they are not the most pressing. Families have members missing, members who have been missing. So how do we go into another cycle of elections with people who are missing? We have over 18 people who are missing for the past 5 years. We don't know what happened to them. We have more than 200 people in Kitalia who are arrested during the elections. How do we get them out? Does the cycle continue? Are they going to stay there for the next 5 years? You have people who have been held in military detention centers, who have been tortured, that have never got justice. And if the Electoral Commission is not pronouncing itself on these issues, that as we go into the elections, these are the things that we want to see. This is how this is how we want the process to look like, at least for them to present a case to Parliament and say, okay, this is how we want to redress some of the problems that we have been facing. Otherwise, all these reforms are feel good, all these reforms are for self-aggrandizement, but they are not the things that a regular voter from Chamaliba may want. A regular voter from Kamodokima might be wanting. So thank you.
Thank you. Miriam, reforms, parliament, the presidency, term limits, presidential running mate. What's your reaction to all this? Do you think it is the right time? And indeed, is this the cure to the challenges that Uganda is facing today?
I want to agree with my fellow panelists. I think the reforms are coming in a little bit too late, which is the delay tactic of NRM government. They've been playing it time and again. They just slump in reforms last minute, and then they pass them even without voting, without consulting anybody. It's kind of way like rigging the process. And so, but the biggest thing I think in here is not even what Impuga is suggesting, because that one, if it doesn't benefit the ruling party, they will just push it aside. For them, what they care, I think what we should look at is what Mao, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, is suggesting. The fact that President Museveni wants to avoid the national elections and just delegate the parliament to vote for him, in a way of changing the presidential system to the parliamentary system. That process shouldn't be something to be discussed with the parliament by the parliament. It should be something maybe we can do with some research, very thorough research, consulting every Ugandan, maybe after consulting people, then holding a referendum, comprehensive process to make sure that every Ugandan is on board, because it would impact a lot on the way we govern the country. It's a big change, and that reform should go alongside with other things like reducing the powers of the president. If now the legislature is to be the top organ to elect the president, then the legislature should even have more powers than the executive. So there is a lot of so many things they are trying to cover there, and their way, it's like Francis and other panelists have said, it's like they are rigging it, they are pushing it in there. It's kind of like a political fraud, and it's a way either Museveni is no longer confident about winning a national election on universal suffrage, and is trying to avoid it by pushing in through such an amendment, which is like he knows he can bribe the rubber stamp parliament that we have today, and it goes through. So as Ugandans, we should really stand up and challenge these such schemes. We shouldn't even wait for the voting only. Like I said earlier, participating in election process is not about the actual voting. It's all about decision making, determining, being part of the process to determine and change the leadership, or putting in the leadership that you really believe in, and policy making. So we should protest that. Ideally, we shouldn't even be looking at electoral reforms. We should be looking at having a national dialogue, because our constitution has been abused over time, that right now it's like a piece of paper that is really no longer effective as it should be. So we should be looking at a national dialogue, a way to consult everybody, a way to involve every other Ugandan in decision making, for us to determine the future we want. And if Museveni really has a conscience and is patriotic as he claims, he should be looking at a transitional process, a political transitional process. If we are to change the way we elect the president from a presidential system to a parliamentary system, let it be part of transition, and it shouldn't benefit him as a sitting president. It should benefit the next coming leader, same as the term limits and every other reform that we need to make into our democratic process. So as for since we have reached the conclusion, as for diaspora vote, that's really very important. We can't emphasize it anymore than we are doing, and we need a discussion. We need to talk more about it. We need to advocate for ourselves as diaspora people. We don't have to wait for these people to think for us. And I call upon my colleagues, let's just talk wherever we can. Let's put our voice out there. Let's advocate for ourselves and make sure that we are part of the table, not wait for handouts from the table. We have a lot to do, we have a lot to contribute, and also the government also always asks so much, and we shouldn't accept the way we are neglected right now. And I think being part of the election, I want to mention, I support what Brian said earlier. Even the diaspora should be a constituency to be represented in the parliament. It doesn't matter which parliament, whether we have a bicameral or whatever. but we should be presented, our voice should be on the table, we should be part of the discussion, not to be delegated or just getting things third party from third parties. We should be part of decision making. We should be there when they are making policies to ensure that we are part and parcel of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miriam.
Kyomugasho. Unfortunately, we're very much out of time, but please allow me to give just a minute to the two guests on the show today. That is Mr. Ntambi, Kharim, and Brian. I'll start with Ntambi in a minute. What can the government of Uganda do to see that your life is better as a Ugandan in diaspora? Just in a minute as you give your final remarks, sir.
Hello, your voice is a little bit low. Can you repeat that?
Sorry,
You're not very audible.
Talk to us about what you think government can do to make the life of Ugandans in diaspora, or particularly your life, better as you survive in that particular location you are in, just as you conclude, sir.
How can the government make my life better here?
Contribute to the well-being of yourself in the diaspora.
I think there is need. There is need to not politicize government institutions, especially in areas where young people need services from government. I would really focus on our friends living in the Arabian and Middle East. They really need government services. So many young people have been abused, and the challenge that they face is that there has not been goodwill from our embassies to help these young people. Unfortunately, as you saw in Canada, where the ambassador was recalled for politicizing an institution that is supposed to be serving all Ugandans. So there is need for government to trust people who have experience in foreign service than bringing their own, cadres and people who just support the regime. There is need to reinvest in foreign service, in equipping our institutions in the diaspora, such as embassies. Like Mr. Francis said earlier, he had called the embassy hundreds of times without response. It might not be that they don't want to pick, but they don't have the human resource to be there. I think a year ago I spoke to a friend of mine who used to work in foreign service, and she said they receive over 700 calls a day. Now 700 calls divided by 8 hours. 9 to 5, how many calls are you receiving? Chances are, even if you are very good, even if you have a call center that has 4 people, at most they can only receive maybe 25 calls in 2 hours. And remember, they also have to break off and do other kinds of work. So there is need for our institutions to be equipped. There is need to give them the human resource that they need, but most of all, find people who have experience in foreign service than having the cadres of the regime. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ntambi, Kharim. And finally, Brian, briefly, are you optimistic that we're going to be successful in the quest for the participation of the diaspora community in the civic activities of the country? Yes, Brian.
Yeah, Phillip, I think you kind of broke up, but I think I had your question. I think your question was, you kind of dropped off, but I believe your question was, are we optimistic that we're going to be successful in this push, right? Yeah, so I'm very optimistic. Last time I was on this show, we were raising money for Uganda Diaspora, and we were able to raise it, and the team was able to come to San Diego. So I know every time I come on this show, it is good luck. So now that we're on this show, we know we're gonna, I think, make some great progress on this endeavor. And really, what I want to add on another point, I think earlier you mentioned like how come why people think that diaspora is disconnected from what's happening on the ground. I think there have been a lot of changes over the last couple of decades. You now have WhatsApp, you have Facebook, you have social media. You have a lot of communication tools that were just not available several decades ago. People used to have to write each other or before they could know what's going on in their country. But now with social media, even people in the diaspora can know what's happening in Kampala before even people in Kampala know what's happening in some part of the country because of social media. So I think the changes in technology have made the diaspora much more, I think, involved in their home countries than they used to be. And then another point I wanted to add is the African Union actually recognizes the diaspora as its sixth region. So East Africa, West Africa, Central, North, you now have the diaspora as the sixth region. So kind of what we are pushing for the national diaspora policy, what you read earlier, the EU did the mapping of the different African countries that have this. It's not coming from nowhere. Part of it is being pushed down by the African Union to have all the countries compliant. So Uganda is just lagging behind that. So it's not just a Uganda diaspora thing, it's all diaspora. That's why you're having several African countries, Rwanda, Kenya, also push their own initiatives. And actually, President Ruto renamed the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Kenya to the Minister of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs. So there's a general continental-wide push to have the diaspora much more involved in African development because they recognize the value that diasporas sent. I think Nigerian diaspora sent 20 billion remittances just here. So there's a huge, I think, huge value that the diaspora can add to the process. And then maybe just to add on a little bit point earlier, which I was trying to make, which maybe may not have been made earlier. So when you have a senator that is voted on by a whole state of 30 million, the kind of caliber you have of that person is different than if someone is voted on by a small constituency. Because when someone is voted on by a bigger population, that person is going to have to be a little bit more moderate, you know? For example, someone who's voted in by, that's what I meant by that. Someone who's voted in by a smaller population will be quote unquote more tribal. They may have, they may tend to be voted in by one issue, saying, I'm going to take your guns away. And that issue may be popular in a certain constituency, and that may get him to office. But when you have a much more diverse crowd, a much more diverse state, that person will tend to be much more moderate. So I think that's kind of the argument, the case for having a bicameral parliament. That because the caliber of people would, people always say, what happened to the caliber of our parliament in Uganda at independence? But people forget at independence, the districts were much bigger. The constituents were much bigger. So you have a much more different caliber of politician that emerges from that constituency than a smaller constituency. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brian Kwesiga, for those amazing views and indeed for making time to join the conversation today. Mr. Kharim Ntambi, thank you so much for joining us and for the amazing views you give us. Mr. Albert Bakasara, thank you so much for your time and indeed for the views you give to the conversation. Ms. Kyomugasho Miriam, thank you so much for joining us and for your views. And Mr. Francis Kamuhanda, thank you so much for your views and for making time to join the conversation. And to you, our viewers, thank you so much for making time indeed and always keeping it the Ugandan Diaspora on Civic Space TV. Special thanks to Africa and the CCG for putting this work together. And special thanks to the people behind the machines, the technical team. We appreciate the work you do, Malcolm and your team. And from us, we say good evening. And may you have freedom always.
Thank you, and nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend and a good week ahead.
Thank you. Be well, all of you.
You're welcome.